My name's Luke, and I've always been a simple guy. Born in a little Missouri town where folks wave from their porches and the air smells like diesel and honeysuckle. I grew up with a hard-working mom, 2 pairs of hand-me-down boots, and a dream that didn't stretch much farther than having a house, a dog, and a good woman to share it all with. Turns out, I got all 3. Her name was Emma. I met her on a Friday at the gas station, of all places. She was trying to get the air pump to work, kneeling there in a sundress, hair pinned up like she was headed to church. I offered to help, and next thing I knew, we were sharing milkshakes at the Sonic and laughing like we'd known each other all our lives. Emma wasn't like anyone I'd ever met. She had this spark in her eyes, like she was always halfway to somewhere wild. She talked about Africa, India, jungles, deserts, things I'd only ever seen in schoolbooks or on those nature channels late at night. But the thing she talked about the most, more than anything, was tigers. Big cats with burning eyes and silent paws. She said it was her dream to see one up close, not behind glass, but in the wild. One day, she'd say, leaning against me in bed, "I want to look one right in the eyes, Luke. I want to feel small and alive." And every time, I'd pull her close and whisper, "One day, babe. I'll take you there." I meant it, too. Problem was, one day never came. Life kept its foot on my neck. I was working 2 jobs, mechanic during the day, janitor at night, trying to make ends meet. We had bills stacked up like old magazines, and every time I saved a little something, the car would break down or her mom would need help or rent would jump. She never complained, not at first. She'd sit beside me, folding laundry, saying, "We'll get there eventually. Just being with you is enough." But I could see it in her eyes, that ache, like something wild inside her was trapped. And then came him. He showed up for Thanksgiving. My stepfather, Charles. He'd been married to my mom since I was 17, and though we weren't close, I respected the guy. Corporate type, always in a blazer even when it was 90 out. He lived in Chicago, traveled for business, and talked more about golf than God. We never had much to say to each other, but he was good to my mom, and that counted for something. He brought wine that cost more than my paycheck. Charles listened. He asked about her dreams, her travels, and when she brought up the tigers, he leaned back and smiled like he was the damn genie out of a bottle. "You know," he said, sipping his red wine, "I've got connections in India. Safari lodges, private guides, all that jazz. I could arrange something if you're serious." Emma's eyes widened like a kid on Christmas morning. She looked at me with that old spark, and I nodded, half grinning, though my throat felt tight. "That'd be a dream," she said softly. I should have said no. Should have stood up, said we'd go together when I could afford it. But pride's a strange thing. I didn't want to look small in front of Charles, and I didn't want to take away her hope. So I let it happen. A month later, she was gone. 2 weeks in India, Charles said, all expenses paid. A family gift. She called me every other night. Sent pictures, her on a jeep, her at sunset, her beside tiger tracks in the sand. Then, one day, the calls stopped. She came back quieter, tanner, eyes heavier. She kissed me when she walked through the door, but something was missing. Something big. I didn't ask, not at first. I didn't want to know. But I did know. And when I finally asked, she didn't deny it. "I'm sorry," she whispered, crying in our bed. "I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't plan it. It was the moment. The heat. The thrill. With my stepfather." The words made me sick. I sat there, staring at the wall, trying to breathe. The woman I'd loved, the dream I'd fought for, she'd broken us for a damn safari and a man who wore cufflinks to breakfast. But I didn't scream. I didn't hit the wall. I just stood up, walked outside, and sat in the truck with the engine off until the sun rose. And then, like a fool, I forgave her. Because love is cruel like that. It breaks you in half and still makes you come crawling back with the better piece of yourself. Forgiveness ain't something you wrap up in a neat little bow and hand over all at once. It's a process, a long, slow bleed. I told myself I forgave her, and maybe I meant it, in a half-broken way. But every time I looked at Emma, I saw the reflection of something I wasn't, something richer, wilder, more exciting. Charles. I didn't even say his name out loud for months. Just called him, or that bastard, when I was talking to myself, which I did a lot after it all came out. Emma swore it was over. She told me it was just a stupid mistake and begged me to let it go. Said she wanted to stay. Said I was her home. I believed her, but it still burned in places I couldn't reach. And the worst part? I wasn't angry just at her. I was angry at myself. For being poor. For being plain. For not being able to give her what some stiff in a tailored suit could. It was like waking up to a truth I'd always feared: love might be enough for fairy tales, but in the real world, people chase the thrill. I didn't confront Charles. I didn't punch him in the mouth or curse him out. No, I did something worse. I got quiet. I went back to work like nothing had happened. Changed oil by day, mopped up puke by night. But something inside me was different, switched on. Like a fire had been lit under my ribs. I was done surviving. I was gonna win. And I had a plan. I started learning. Took free online courses on finance, business, investing. Listened to podcasts while scrubbing toilets and read articles on my breaks. The world of money had always seemed like some other language, but I forced myself to understand it. Stocks, real estate, mergers. I was hungry for it. I stopped spending on anything that didn't matter. No beer, no cable, no vacations. I flipped old cars in my garage and saved every penny. Then I made my first investment, small, dumb even, but it paid off. And I rolled that into another. And another. Every time I made a profit, I smiled. Not for the money, but for the day I'd look Charles in the eye and take back what he stole from me. Emma noticed the change. She'd sit across from me at dinner and ask what I was thinking. I'd lie, tell her I was just tired. Truth was, I was obsessed with building something he couldn't buy his way out of. Our marriage became quiet. Not cold, but careful. Like we were both afraid of cracking the glass. We'd watch movies and hold hands, but there was distance. She still cried sometimes when she thought I was asleep. And maybe I should have held her tighter, should have helped her heal too, but I couldn't, not while I was still bleeding. The thing about revenge is, it don't leave much room for anything else. 2 years passed like that. And by the end of it, I wasn't poor anymore. I partnered with a few folks I met through an investment group and started buying into companies, small ones at first. I got into logistics, transport, supply chain tech. Boring stuff. But the money was good. And I was smart about it. Then, one day, I saw the name pop up on a corporate bulletin, Thorntech Logistics, a company Charles had been working for the past 7 years. Middle executive. Lots of travel. Big influence but not enough ownership to protect himself. And I smiled. Because that's when I knew. I made moves quietly. Bought shares through proxies. Used a shell firm to keep my name out of it. Partnered with a guy in Chicago who owed me a favor. It took time, months, but eventually, I bought controlling interest in the company. Just like that, I owned it. I waited a few days after the ink dried before flying up to Chicago. Emma didn't know where I was going. I told her I had business. She kissed me at the door and said, "Be safe." I didn't say a word. The boardroom was high up, one of those glass towers with views of the lake and too much chrome. I walked in wearing a suit I bought just for the occasion. Dark, sharp, tailored. Charles was already there, sipping his morning coffee, flipping through notes. He didn't recognize me at first. Guess I'd changed, lost weight, trimmed the beard, wore money on my shoulders. When he finally looked up, he froze. "Luke," he said, standing slow. "What the hell are you?" I dropped the file on the table. "My name. My shares. My signature. I own the company now," I said calmly. "And I'm here to let you go." He blinked, stunned, like I'd just hit him with a brick. "You, what? You can't be serious." "I'm very serious," I said. "I've already spoken to legal. Your things are being packed up as we speak." He stood there, speechless, color draining from his face. "I don't want your apology," I added, walking past him. "I just want you gone." I didn't feel triumph walking out of that office. I felt empty. Not because he didn't deserve it, he did, but because revenge don't fix broken things. It just puts a bow on the pain. Still, when I flew home that night, something in me had changed. I had power now. I had worth. And even if Emma never truly loved me the way she once did, I could finally look her in the eyes without flinching. There's a strange kind of silence that follows a victory. You expect fireworks, music, people cheering. But for me, after I fired Charles and flew back home, all I heard was my own breath, calm, steady, and hollow. Emma met me at the airport. She wrapped her arms around me like she'd been waiting years for that one hug. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah," I said, smiling faintly. "Everything's handled." She didn't ask for details, and I didn't give any. Some part of her must have known. She'd always been smarter than she let on. Back at home, the days rolled by like normal, but nothing was the same. Emma was trying. I could see it in the way she touched my arm when she walked by, the way she laughed a little too hard at my jokes, or left sweet notes on the counter with my morning coffee. She wanted us to be us again. And Lord, I wanted that too. But there was something different in the way I looked at her now. It wasn't hate. Not even resentment. Just distance. Like the glass between the zoo visitor and the tiger, beautiful, wild, but unreachable. Funny thing is, we never talked about Charles after that. Not once. She didn't ask what happened to him. I didn't bring it up. Maybe that's what saved us. Or maybe that's what killed us slowly. One afternoon, Emma found an old shoebox while cleaning the hall closet. It was full of travel brochures. India, Nepal, Sri Lanka. Photos of tigers lounging in the brush or prowling through the grasslands. I could tell by the dust that she hadn't touched that box in years. She sat on the floor with the lid in her lap, and for a second, she looked like the girl I married, hopeful, soft, and full of wonder. "I used to dream about this stuff," she said quietly. "I mean, really dream." "I know you did," I replied, leaning on the doorway. I guess I stopped believing it'd happen. We sat there in silence for a while. Then, without thinking, I said, "We could still go." She looked up. "What?" "I mean it. We're in a different place now. We could afford it. Hell, we could go tomorrow if you wanted." Her eyes searched mine like she wasn't sure if I was joking. "You'd want to do that with me?" I nodded. "Of course." She crawled across the floor and wrapped her arms around me. And I think, for a moment, I believed this was the start of something new. We booked the trip within the week. A 10-day guided tiger safari across Ranthambore National Park in India. First-class flights, private bungalow, the works. I spared no expense. If she'd ever doubted my love, I wanted this trip to remind her. And I'll be honest, it did something for me too. I wasn't the kid from a small town anymore. I'd built something. I'd risen from oil stains and shame and made myself into a man who could look the world in the eye. India was hotter than I imagined. Not the dry heat I was used to, but thick, soupy, like you were wading through the air itself. The roads were chaotic, the food was fire in your mouth, and the people, God, the people were beautiful. We spent the first few days touring temples and markets, drinking chai in the shade, watching monkeys swing from wires like circus performers. But it was the fifth morning when we finally saw them. Tigers. 2 of them, siblings, the guide said. Lying half-hidden in the brush just after sunrise, their orange coats glowing under the pink sky. Emma gasped and clutched my hand like she was touching something holy. "They're real," she whispered. I didn't say anything. I just watched her. And for the first time in years, she cried, not from guilt or regret, but from joy. That night, we sat on the porch of our bungalow, listening to the crickets and the distant call of peacocks. "You ever think," she said, sipping her wine, "how different things could have been?" "Yeah," I said. "All the time. I was a fool back then. We both were." She turned to me, eyes glistening. "Why'd you forgive me, Luke?" I looked out into the trees. "Because hate's heavy. And I was tired of carrying it." She leaned her head against my shoulder. "You're a better man than I deserve." I didn't respond to that. I just sat with her, breathing in the wild night air, wondering if forgiveness had finally bloomed into something that could last. But there's one thing I've learned: the past doesn't die just because you stop looking back. Sometimes, it circles around, quiet and patient, waiting for the moment you let your guard down. And when we got home from that trip, something was waiting for me in the mailbox. A letter. No return address. I opened it on the porch. Just one line, handwritten. "You think this is over? See." That letter felt heavier than it should have. One short sentence, 10 words total, but it hit like a punch in the gut. The paper smelled faintly of aftershave. His brand. Charles had always been the kind of guy who wore cologne to mow the lawn. Cheap, musky, and overconfident, just like him. I sat there on the porch a long time, watching the wind play with the edge of the envelope. The sun was dipping low behind the trees, setting everything in a dull orange glow, like a tiger's coat in twilight. "You think this is over?" I didn't answer out loud, but I sure thought about it. I didn't tell Emma about the letter. I wanted to, but something in me said don't. We'd just come back from paradise. Her face was finally free from that constant thread of guilt, and mine was just starting to forget the taste of bitterness. Why ruin that? Instead, I tucked the letter into the back of my desk drawer, beneath old bills and broken pens. I figured if I ignored it long enough, it would lose its power. But I was wrong. The next few weeks were strange. I started getting calls late at night. No voice on the other end, just breathing, heavy and slow, like someone watching a horror movie too close to the screen. Then there were the flowers. Bouquets of tiger lilies left on our porch every Sunday morning. No note, no delivery receipt. Just a bright bunch of orange petals staring up at us like they knew everything. Emma thought it was sweet at first. "Maybe it's a secret admirer," she teased one morning, setting the vase on the kitchen table. I forced a smile. Maybe. I didn't have the heart to tell her tiger lilies were her favorite, and his. I started sleeping with the lights on in my office. Not because I was scared, not exactly. But because I didn't trust what the dark might bring. Memories, shadows, or worse, him. One night, around 2 a.m., I heard a noise outside. Not an animal, not a raccoon knocking over trash cans. Something heavier. Slower. I crept to the window and looked out into the yard. There was a figure by the tree line. Lean, shoulders slouched, arms crossed like he was waiting for a bus that wasn't coming. I couldn't see his face, but I didn't need to. I knew it was Charles. By the time I ran out with a flashlight and a tire iron, he was gone. But he'd left something behind. Another bouquet of tiger lilies. This time, stabbed into the dirt with a hunting knife. Emma started noticing the change in me. "You're quiet lately," she said over dinner one night. "Is it me? Is something wrong between us again?" "No," I said, a little too fast. "It's not you. I've just been thinking a lot." She gave me a long look. "Is this about him?" I hesitated. Then nodded. "He sent a letter. Just a sentence. But I think he wants trouble." Her face fell. She looked down at her plate. "I'm sorry." "I know." We sat in silence for a while before she whispered, "Do you regret forgiving me?" I thought about it. Really thought about it. "No," I said. "I just regret trusting him in the first place." That weekend, I took a trip out to where Charles used to live. His old house, my childhood home, was up for sale, grass overgrown and shutters sagging. I peeked through a cracked window and saw dust, empty walls, nothing of him left. But I wasn't looking for ghosts, I was looking for a lead. So I drove around, asking questions. Local diner, gas station, even the old mechanic who still had grease on his knuckles and memory in his eyes. One guy finally spoke up. "Yeah, I seen him. A couple weeks back. Said he was moving down near the river. Got a little shack near the edge of the woods." "The river?" I asked. "Yeah. Real quiet out there. No neighbors. Just raccoons and regrets." I didn't go that night. I waited. Thought about it. But one thing became clear, Charles wasn't done. He'd lost his job, his pride, maybe even his sanity, but he still had his hunger. Hunger for control. For attention. For revenge. And I couldn't just sit around and wait for him to strike. Not again. The next morning, I kissed Emma on the forehead, told her I was going into town for supplies, and packed my bag with gloves, a flashlight, and the same tire iron I'd used all those years ago to fix my first car. If Charles wanted a reckoning, he was about to get one. The road to the river was one I hadn't driven in years. Gravel snapped under the tires like bones, the trees closing in tighter the deeper I went. My knuckles gripped the wheel hard, and the air got heavier with every mile. This wasn't just a visit, it was a confrontation years in the making. I wasn't looking for a fight. But I wasn't scared of one either. Somewhere between forgiving Emma and firing Charles, I'd realized something: people like him don't go away quietly. They lick their wounds, find their moment, and strike when you're rebuilding. He wanted me rattled. He wanted me looking over my shoulder forever. I wasn't going to give him that power. The shack sat crooked near the bend in the river, like it had grown from the mud itself. Roof sagging. Porch half-rotted. A tin chimney poking through like a finger asking for silence. The only sound was the water rushing by and the faint creak of wood shifting under its own weight. I parked behind some bushes, out of sight, and made my way on foot, stepping carefully. The sun was sinking again, tiger orange against the trees, and the shadows stretched long. I kept my hand on the tire iron in my jacket. When I reached the edge of the porch, I paused. The door was open just a crack. Not enough to welcome someone in, just enough to let you know you were expected. I knocked once. Loud. Deliberate. "Come in," came his voice. Calm. Lazy. Like we were still family. He was sitting at a small wooden table inside, same cologne clouding the air, same smug posture, just older now, saggier, grayer, but still thinking he was the star of his own twisted little show. "Well, if it ain't the prodigal son," he said, smiling like the devil who knew he still had a tail. I'm not your son, I said flatly. He just chuckled and gestured to the chair across from him. Sit. Unless you're here to hit me with that thing you've got in your coat. I didn't sit. I came to tell you to stop. His smile thinned. Stop what? The calls. The flowers. The visits. Emma doesn't know you're stalking her, but if you keep it up, I'll make sure she does. He leaned back in his chair. She'd believe you, huh? I didn't answer. I just stared him down. Boy, he said, his voice darkening, you took everything from me. My job, my future. I was your mother's husband before I ever knew you. I raised you. And you threw me away like garbage. I stepped closer. You seduced my wife. You knew exactly what you were doing. You twisted everything. I didn't take anything, you lost it. Still hurts, he muttered, staring down at his hands. She used to smile when she said my name. Now she won't even whisper it. You don't get to talk about her like that. He looked up. You think she really loves you? I clenched the tire iron tighter. Don't. But he was already standing now, closing the distance between us. You think buying my company made you better than me? You're just a kid playing house with a broken woman. That's when I dropped the tire iron on the floor. Let it clang loud between us. No, I said. I'm a man trying to protect the woman I love, from people like you. He stepped back. Just a hair. But I saw it. That flicker in his eyes. Fear. You're done, Charles, I said quietly. I don't need to hit you. I don't need to yell. I already beat you. He didn't reply. Just turned and poured himself a drink from a cheap bottle by the sink. His hand trembled. I walked out without looking back. The tire iron stayed on the floor. A reminder. A warning. Driving home, the stars started blinking through the trees, and I let myself breathe. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like prey. Emma was asleep when I got in. I crawled in beside her, pulled the blanket up, and watched her face in the soft light. She stirred, then smiled. You okay? She murmured. I am now. The river would keep flowing. Charles would stew in his bitterness. But we were still here. Stronger. Wiser. Bruised, but not broken. And as the night wrapped around our home, I knew one thing for sure. Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It means reclaiming your peace. You ever notice how quiet can feel louder than noise? That's what it felt like after the shack. No more calls. No more lilies. No more breathing on the line. Charles had gone silent. Disappeared back into the trees, into that rotten little shack on the riverbend. But quiet doesn't mean peace. It just means the storm's waiting. Emma was doing better. I could see it in how she laughed again, how she moved around the kitchen humming to herself, even how she reached for my hand without thinking twice. That used to hurt more than help, because I'd wonder, did she hold his hand the same way? But now, I let myself hold it back. Healing doesn't show up with fanfare. It sneaks in, slow and gentle, like the sun through blinds. You don't notice it till you're already standing in the light. I wasn't whole. But I wasn't broken anymore either. Still, something inside me had changed, and not just from what Charles did. I started getting up before the sun, drinking my coffee cold, sitting out on the porch like an old man with ghosts for company. And I found myself thinking more and more about hunger, not food hunger, but the kind that makes men lie, cheat, steal, destroy. Charles had it. That animal craving for power, attention, praise. It was the same thing that made him go after Emma, not because he loved her, but because she was mine. But now, I had it too. Not for her. Not for revenge. For success. I didn't want to just own the company Charles worked for. I wanted to build something. Something bigger than him. Bigger than the pain. Not to prove anything to him, but to myself. So I started putting in hours. Real hours. Day and night. I took the company and reshaped it, rebranded it, expanded it. I read every contract. Sat in every meeting. Took every call, even when Emma said I should rest. "You're going to work yourself into the ground," she warned. I kissed her cheek. "I'm already halfway there. Might as well dig until I hit gold." It wasn't just ambition. It was survival. I needed to outgrow the shadows we'd been living in. And piece by piece, I did. The business tripled. We started acquiring smaller companies. A few news articles even called me a rising force in the regional market. I laughed when I read that. Because I was just a boy who used to fix fences for beer money. Now I was signing deals with men who used to ignore me. Funny how hunger, when guided, can build more than it destroys. One night, maybe 6 months after I visited the shack, I came home late and found Emma on the couch holding a manila folder. She looked pale. "What's that?" I asked. She handed it to me without a word. Inside were a dozen photos. Of me. Of our house. Of us at the grocery store, walking the dog, sitting at a cafe. All taken from a distance. All dated. All labeled in block letters at the bottom, property. In the corner of the last photo was a symbol. A tiger's face drawn in red ink, crudely but clear. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. "He's watching us." I didn't speak. I just stared at the photos. "Do we call the police?" she asked. I shook my head slowly. "Not yet." "Why not?" "Because he's trying to get in our heads. That's his last move. And it's desperate." She folded into me, trembling. "I'm scared." I kissed the top of her head. "I'm not." And I wasn't. I didn't know if it was foolishness or grit, but I felt calm. Like a tiger pacing the edge of the forest, waiting for the right moment. Later that night, I pulled the envelope from the drawer where I'd kept Charles's first letter. I slid the photos in beside it. Then I locked the drawer. The old me, the boy in the backyard who worshipped his stepfather, who cried when he got left behind, he was gone. What stood in his place now was someone else. Not just a man. Not just a husband. Something stronger. Sharper. Quieter. A tiger. And tigers don't flinch when prey circles back. I didn't sleep much after the envelope with the photos showed up. It wasn't fear keeping me up. No. It was calculation. The kind of thinking that happens behind the eyes when the rest of the world is quiet. The kind of stillness where old instincts wake up. Emma drifted off around midnight, curled up beside me with her hand resting on my chest like it always used to. And I laid there, staring at the ceiling, counting his steps in my mind. Charles was circling. He didn't like being fired. He didn't like being humiliated. But more than anything, he didn't like being forgotten. And that's exactly what I'd done, made him irrelevant. This wasn't about Emma anymore. She was just the doorway. This was about me and him, and something older than either of us. I wasn't just the stepson he used to joke about. I wasn't that kid anymore. He hadn't learned that yet. But he would. The next morning, I called up an old buddy of mine named Hank who used to work private security before he opened a garage out in Weston. I told him I needed a camera system installed. Not just doorbell junk, but the real deal, infrared, motion-activated, loop-proof. "I'll have it done by sundown," he said without asking questions. Good man. Then I made one more call, this one to an even older connection. A guy I knew from my days patching roofs. We called him Radar. Nobody knew his real name. Radar did freelance tracking, mostly cheating spouses and missing dogs, but he had a knack for finding people who didn't want to be found. I need a location, I told him. Guy's name is Charles Reagan. Radar didn't ask why. Give me 48 hours. That evening, I sat with Emma on the porch. She had a blanket around her shoulders and a mug of tea in her hands, her eyes fixed on the woods across the road. Do you think he's out there? She asked. Maybe, I said. But it doesn't matter. She looked at me sideways. Why not? I set down my coffee. Because the trap's already baited. She didn't ask more. I think she understood, this wasn't just about fear or safety. It was about drawing him out. Letting him come to me, so I could deal with it my way. She leaned her head against my shoulder. I don't want you to become like him. I let that sit in the silence for a long time before I answered. I'm not like him, I said. But I'm not the same man you married either. And I meant that. 2 days later, Radar called. Found your guy, he said. Lives in a trailer on the edge of Deadwood Pines. Doesn't work. Doesn't drive. Just waits. I closed my eyes. Good, I said. That's good. You want me to keep watching? No, I told him. I'll take it from here. That night, I didn't tell Emma I was leaving. She was asleep. Peaceful. I kissed her forehead and whispered, you won't have to be afraid anymore. Then I got in the truck and drove east through the pines. Past the abandoned mill. Past the old reservoir where kids used to swim in summer. All the way until the dirt turned to gravel and the trees leaned in like eavesdroppers. Deadwood Pines wasn't much more than broken cabins and coyote howls. But tucked in the far edge was a rust-colored trailer with 2 windows boarded shut and a porch light that flickered like it hadn't fully died. I parked, killed the engine, and stepped out. The air smelled like old rain and engine oil. And somewhere behind the trailer, I heard a screen door creak. Charles stepped out, barefoot, in a bathrobe. He wasn't surprised to see me. I think he knew this day would come. Well, he said, smirking, look what the cat dragged in. I said nothing. He walked closer. I bet she's been having nightmares. You think she sees me in the corners? In the dark? That's how you know you made an impression, boy. I stood still. He tilted his head. What? You come to cry? Come to fight me? No, I said. I came to finish this. He snorted. What are you gonna do? Beat me up? Burn down my trailer? You're still just the little mutt I used to feed scraps to. I pulled a folder from my coat. Thick. Heavy. Legal documents. Charles Reagan, I said calmly, you've been served. He looked down at the envelope, confused. Restraining order. Permanent. Also, there's a lien on this dump. You owe back taxes. And you'll be formally charged with harassment if you so much as look at us again. His smile faded. I stepped closer. You didn't think I'd fight you with fists, did you? You taught me better than that. I don't bark. I don't bite. I buy. His eyes flared. You think this makes you a man? No, I said. This makes me free. And with that, I turned and walked back to my truck. Left him standing there, robe flapping, ego crumbling. I got home just before dawn. Emma was waiting, sitting at the kitchen table in her robe, coffee steaming. You went to him, she said. I nodded. And? He won't bother us again. She didn't ask how. She didn't have to. She just got up, walked over, and wrapped her arms around me. That's when I knew it was over. Not just the danger. But the part of me that used to chase approval. I didn't need him anymore. Not his praise. Not his permission. Not his blood. Just peace. Peace didn't arrive with fireworks. It crept in slow, like morning fog, silent, gentle, unsure whether it was welcome. But I welcomed it. After months of war between memory and revenge, I finally felt the quiet stretch its arms. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't waking up to the echo of Charles's voice in my head, or checking the corners of every room like he might be crouched there, waiting. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. And Emma, well, she was changing too. Not in big ways. Just little ones. She started leaving the porch light on for me again. She started humming when she did the dishes. And sometimes, I'd catch her looking at me like she was trying to memorize my face. I'd forgiven her, sure. But that didn't mean the hurt was gone. Forgiveness is just the start of the climb. The mountain's still there. But we were climbing it together. One warm afternoon, we went to the local park. It was tiger-themed, ironically. There were plastic statues and little plaques for kids to read about Bengal stripes and jungle habitats. She smiled at one, lightly touching its whiskered face. "I used to dream of petting one," she said. "Not in a zoo. In the wild." I just nodded. "I'm sorry you couldn't be the one to give me that," she added, not looking at me. "I couldn't," I admitted. "But maybe I still can, just not in the way you thought." She turned to me, curious. I took her hand. "Let me build something real with you." "Not a moment. A life." She didn't say anything. Just squeezed my fingers. Later that week, I called Hank again. "I need you to look into something," I told him. "A wildlife nonprofit. Something that helps protect tigers." He chuckled. "You going soft on me? Just want to make things right." By the weekend, I had a plan. A foundation in Emma's name, the Tiger Eyes Trust. I'd fund it, get the right people behind it. It wouldn't erase what happened, but it would give meaning to the pieces we were left holding. And it'd be a way for her to chase that dream, the right way. Meanwhile, the company was running better than ever. I'd appointed a tough but fair CEO to take the reins so I didn't have to babysit it daily. I was still the owner, of course, but I wasn't interested in control anymore. I was interested in freedom. Funny how money works. Once you have enough of it, you stop needing it the same way. And with Charles out of the picture, the toxic fog that used to hang over my decisions was gone. It was like I could finally breathe without coughing up resentment. Emma started volunteering at a local animal rescue on Saturdays. I'd pick her up after her shifts, and she'd smell like hay and kibble, her cheeks red from the sun, her heart soft from the work. And I'd sit there listening to her talk about the cats and dogs like they were wild creatures she'd just met in the jungle. It made me smile. This was the woman I fell in love with. Not the dreamer who wanted faraway lands. But the one who had the courage to stay, even after everything fell apart. One night we sat on the back porch again. The air buzzed with fireflies and the kind of silence that doesn't need to be filled. "You ever think about what comes next?" she asked. I shrugged. I used to think revenge was the end of the story. But now, I don't know. I think it's about what you do after the fire dies down. She nodded. Then she looked at me. Really looked. And she said, "Thank you. For not giving up on me." I wanted to tell her how hard it was, how bitter it felt some days, how much of myself I had to kill just to be able to stand beside her again. But instead, I said, "You're worth the climb." She leaned in and kissed me. And in that moment, it wasn't about Charles. Or betrayal. Or revenge. It was just about us. Two scarred people, still choosing each other. It's strange how quiet life gets once you've chased down every ghost. I thought the noise would keep going, the heartache, the anger, the restless drive to make someone pay. But it doesn't. At some point, everything just settles. The fight leaves your body. The fog lifts. And what you're left with is something simple, something scary. Peace. I used to think peace meant everything was fine. That I'd forget. That I'd never ache again when I looked at Emma. But I was wrong. Peace isn't the absence of pain. It's the willingness to carry it without letting it twist you into someone else. And I was finally someone I recognized again. It was a year to the day since Charles had been fired. I didn't expect to think about him. But I did. Not with anger, just curiosity. I didn't know where he ended up. Rumor had it he'd moved down to Florida, living off his savings and sulking his way through golf courses and beach bars. He was out of my life. But he'd left a mark, whether I wanted to admit it or not. That man taught me something. Sometimes, betrayal doesn't come from a stranger. Sometimes, it wears your father's jacket and smiles across your dinner table. And sometimes, the best revenge is simply surviving, and becoming someone better than he ever believed you could be. Emma and I took a trip. Not to India or Thailand, not to where the wild tigers roamed, but to Montana. A wildlife sanctuary. They had a few retired circus cats, all rescued, living out their days in wide, open spaces under the mountain sky. It wasn't the jungle. But it was peaceful. We stood by the fence, fingers laced together, watching a giant male tiger stretch out under a tree. His ribs moved slow, deep, content. Emma leaned on my shoulder. "Beautiful," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. "They're not in the wild. But they're free now." She looked up at me. "Just like us?" I nodded. We stayed in a little cabin that weekend. No internet. No TV. Just trees and each other. The fire crackled in the stone hearth. We sat on the rug, legs tangled, talking like we used to before things got heavy. She asked me what I wanted next, now that I'd made my money, now that revenge had been served cold and swallowed down. I told her the truth. I want to build something that matters. Something that's not about payback. Maybe take this foundation further. Real conservation. Education programs. Maybe even buy land near a tiger reserve. Not for tourists. For the animals. She smiled, but there were tears in her eyes. "I want to help," she said. "I want to be part of it." I kissed her hand. "You already are." The night before we left Montana, we sat outside under a blanket of stars. She looked up at the sky and whispered, "Do you think he regrets it, Charles?" I thought for a second. Maybe. Maybe not. But I don't need him to. She looked at me again, like she wasn't sure who I was anymore. "You've changed," she said softly. I chuckled. "You helped me." "No," she said. "You did this on your own." And maybe I had. Months passed. Emma became the public face of the foundation. Schools invited her to speak. She wrote articles about the importance of wildlife care. And I stayed in the background, quiet, focused, keeping the engine running while she inspired the world. We weren't perfect. Some days were hard. Some nights we argued. But we always came back to each other. Because we knew what it meant to lose everything. And we weren't going to do it again. One evening, as we walked past the porch swing where everything began, Emma stopped me. "I need to tell you something." I braced myself. She took a deep breath. "I think I'm pregnant." Time froze. I didn't know whether to laugh, cry, or drop to my knees. "You're sure?" I asked. She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. And I just held her. Not because I was scared. But because I finally understood something, the story wasn't ending. It was just beginning. That night, we sat under the stars again, just like we did in Montana, like we did before life spun out of control. And I whispered, let's name her Hope. If it's a girl. Emma smiled, resting her head on my chest. Hope, she echoed. A child born not of fairy tales or flawless romance, but of survival, redemption, and truth. The jungle inside us had gone quiet. And in the stillness, something beautiful had begun to grow.